Hi, I'm Maxine.
I'm Danielle.
And we're the co-founders of Otto Health. We have been posting a bunch of information on our blog for folks who want to start their own practices and who are interested in doing it themselves. At Otto, we offer a really full service solution for folks who want to go from no practice to practice in just a couple of weeks and really scale with us. But there are also people who want to do it by themselves. And so we want to make sure that this information is available and accessible to you as well. We know that some people learn better via audio and video than they do by reading posts online. So we're turning some of this content into videos and audio forms so that everyone can learn in the way that works best for them. Today, we're talking a little bit about how new practices should go about patient acquisition from what we've seen be the most successful. And specifically, we're talking about the difference between using paid advertisements and using local marketing strategies. For a bit of context here, what we've seen a lot is when practices or clinicians come to work with us and they're considering starting their own practice, they have lots of questions about how we help with paid advertisements, thinking that that's kind of the most common way to acquire patients early on in a practice. And what we found from all of our work on these early practices is that actually paid advertisements at a really early stage is not the best way, and we'll get into that today. So that's a little bit of context. The thing to think about here is that when you are shopping for a service, you really want to be shopping based on either a brand that you know, a brand that someone tells you about, or a brand that's really highly reviewed. When you're a new practice, you kind of have zero of those three things. And so if you go out and you get shown via paid advertisements to prospective patients, but they have never heard of you before, don't have any friends who know about you, and you don't have any reviews online that can kind of prove your worth or your value as a clinician, the likelihood that someone is going to convert just from that paid advertisement is very low. So it ends up being a very, very expensive way to get visibility, and then there's a very low return on that investment early in practices.
And the other thing on the topic of the low return investment is just how high that investment actually has to be. Especially in the beginning, you should expect to spend pretty meaningful dollars to actually get in front of prospective patients and to understand what works and what doesn't work. So if you have a really large budget, it's possible that starting with ads is the right place to go. But assuming you're like most people that don't have a massive budget, it's probably not the best place to spend your dollars early on.
Totally. The other thing is this is a general truth. I think when you're really early on, you have a small budget and you're starting a business, but there are specific things about the health and wellness space that make this even more true. So in the cash pay practice world, this is a generally newer concept. So it's going to be harder to sell someone just from them seeing an advertisement if they've never actually heard of the model of care that you're providing before. And for someone who has insurance, they might not understand why it makes sense for them to actually pay cash for certain health and wellness services. And so there's a lot of education that's required that doesn't really lend itself very well to a paid ad.
There might be less of this burden depending on the exact space that you're in. So for example, if you're doing something like medical weight loss where someone cannot access the medication through their insurance because they don't have that care covered unless they're diabetic, it might be the case that there's less education that's necessary. But if you're offering something like direct primary care, most people do have access to primary care through their insurance. So there's a lot more education that's required to help them understand why they should be paying for something out of pocket that they think they receive through their insurance anyway.
That idea really goes into the next point about why it doesn't always work to use paid advertisements early on for health and wellness offerings. And that's because for these kinds of cash pay practices, a huge value that you're selling is a trusting relationship between you as the provider and the patient. And so if someone sees an advertisement for your practice, but they're not getting a sense of who you are, what you're like, the likelihood that they're going to feel like they could build that trusting relationship with you is far lower. And with that in mind, the likelihood that they're going to convert and become your patient just from that advertisement is also far lower.
And to put that into context, even if we're in that world of paid ads, one question that you can ask yourself is, how will I win versus fill in the blank company? So for example, let's say you offer medical weight loss. How will you win versus a company like Henry Meds that's doing a lot of paid ads as well? You are the face of your business, you are your practice, and a lot of reason that patients will come to you is for you in particular. And so if you're trying to compete with Henry Meds on ads, that's really hard to do if you don't have that name recognition just yet.
Absolutely. The last thing here of why paid ads don't always work for an early practice, health and wellness practice, is you also want to be selective with the patients that you're working with. And what I mean by that is you want to find a patient who's really going to value the services that you're offering, that's very high intent and that's committed. Sometimes when people are online, if you catch them maybe on social media, they might not be so high intent as much as they are just going through kind of looking at things, and someone might be willing to try something once just to get a sense of it, but through a paid ad. But if you actually want to find patients who are going to be committed to sign up for something like a membership or a 8 to 12 week program, the odds that you're going to find them online when they have never heard of you before are pretty low.
And on that note, there's a question of what is actually the call to action, whether you do paid ads or some other form of marketing. And a lot of clinicians in this context choose to have that call to action be scheduling a free 15-minute or 30-minute consultation so they can actually meet the patient first and see if they're a fit for the practice. And this is for a couple different reasons. First, especially early on, you really want your first patients to be success stories. So you want to make sure that the patients that you're bringing onto your practice are ones that you feel uniquely well positioned to support. This should not mean that they're just patients that are healthy and don't need your services, but rather patients that really need your services and you really have the toolkit to support them. So that's number one. And then number two is the fact that for a lot of these providers, there are concerns around work-life balance and how demanding their patients will be. And of course, one of the main benefits of this type of service for patients is the access that they have to their provider, but that should not mean that their provider has no boundaries and has no work-life balance. So a lot of times folks will want to talk to their prospective patients first and just set those expectations and make sure that they understand that just because they're going to be in a cash pay context does not mean that they can call to ask some innocuous question at 2 a.m. in the night.
Totally. And with that in mind, let's say that you run a paid ad and you're offering that free 15 or 30-minute consultation, and you get a lot of people who are like, oh, I'm interested in something free. You're going to have a lot of education calls, a lot of boundary setting calls without a lot of conversion, which can end up taking up a lot of your day, especially if you're getting a lot of low intent leads from these sorts of paid advertisements. So you want to be protective of your time, even though you're really looking for patients, you're looking to figure out how you're going to get this practice off the ground. You really want to make sure that there's that match and that people know what they're getting into, and you do as well. So if paid advertisements is not the way to do it, what is the way to do it? This is where we really believe that hyperlocal patient acquisition is the way to acquire patients early on. And maybe just to break down that word, hyperlocal patient acquisition is similar to local marketing. And what that means is tapping into your local network, your close friends, your families, your coworkers, your extended network. So maybe their friends, their families, their coworkers, and getting the word out that way about what you're offering and what your business is doing. We find that those people are really high intent. They're going to get it sooner. And there's a bunch of reasons that we'll go over now about why that works so well early on.
And so to put that into context, what we're seeing is that for most successful practices, at least their first 15 to 30 patients come directly from either their network or their extended network. And so your focus early on really should be, how can you activate your network? How can you activate the businesses that you know, the people that you know, to grow your initial practice? And then from there, think about more scaled approaches to marketing.
Totally. So the first reason that local marketing is so valuable is really what you just said here, and also what Danielle said about competing with Henry Meds. You have an advantage locally that Henry Meds could not have, because you know the people that you live with, you know the businesses you live with, you know the needs of your community, and being able to speak to those as you are talking to prospective patients, as you're talking to community members about what it is you're doing, is going to really differentiate your services and use your natural advantages so that you can acquire patients for the specific thing that you're offering. So as an example, if you know a business owner down the street, you can go talk to them about what their clientele needs, and then they're going to become an advocate for you in a way that they're less likely to become an advocate for a larger brand that doesn't have a local footprint. The second reason that local marketing really works is because it helps you find your 1,000 true fans. And 1,000 is actually too big of a number for many of these practices, but 1,000 true fans is a concept where instead of trying to broadly get people interested in an idea, if you can instead find a relatively small number of people who are really jazzed up about the thing that you're offering, that is going to be so much more powerful and pay dividends down the road. So let's say that you find your first 15 to 30 patients. They're your neighbors, you know them, you have great success stories with them. They are going to be your biggest advocates across the community about the value of your service in your practice.
And then the next point is really as an extension of that. So you have your 1,000 true fans or whatever the right number is for you. And the question is, how can you then grow beyond that? And the goal really is to activate a local word of mouth flywheel. So once you have that initial base that's really excited about your services and really understands the value of your practice, they will go out there and help you acquire more patients through word of mouth, through letting the people that they trust and that they know about you. And that really should be your focus initially. How can you build that local word of mouth flywheel that will sustain your practice through its first or second stage of growth as well?
Totally. We found anecdotally that folks will refer their friends, their family, and then the kind of trickle effect of you might have someone who's 3 or 4 degrees away, but now you're in that extended network as well as a known and trusted entity. So it can be so powerful.
And the awesome thing about word of mouth as a source for acquiring new patients is the cost, which is in most cases 0 or very close to 0. A concept that you'll probably learn more about as you go deeper into this world is this concept of customer acquisition costs, or CAC. And no matter what, if you're running paid ads, you will have a customer acquisition cost that's pretty significantly above $0, whereas word of mouth for the most part is completely free. As you get further down the line, you might be interested in actually financially incentivizing word of mouth. And there are lots of questions that we can get into on how do you structure the right refer a friend program to be cognizant of healthcare laws. But in the beginning, you really can rely on this free word of mouth to fuel your practice growth.
Totally. All you have to do for great word of mouth is deliver great patient care and really connect with your patients, which is what you would be doing anyway. So it's $0 and it may be even 0 additional time to get that word of mouth flywheel going. The next reason that local marketing is super valuable is that it helps you saturate the place that you're in a way that you could not do if you were expanding in a larger region. So let's say that you're licensed in Florida and you say, okay, I'm going to target all of Florida, either with a paid ads or with some sort of approach here. And you have one person in a corner who kind of knows your practice, and then one person in another place who knows about your practice. That is not creating a network of people who can know and talk about and vouch for your practice within a smaller set of communities. So it's going to be really hard for people to hear about your practice once, twice, 3 times. Whereas if you focus in a very local region, out of nowhere, you're going to have a prospective patient who's like, no way, I just heard about practice A 2 days ago from this friend, and now this other friend is telling me about it. So it becomes this kind of saturating effect that can then be a really powerful conversion technique for a prospective patient.
And on the topic of licensing, that's actually a pitfall that we see clinicians falling into pretty frequently, which is thinking, okay, I'm licensed in 3 different states. I can treat patients in those 3 different states. So let me focus all of my effort across those 3 states. And what we find is if you're spreading your effort across different geographic areas, it becomes a lot harder, to Maxine's point, to really build that network. So even if you have the ability to treat patients across an entire state or multiple states, we really recommend focusing locally in the beginning and then eventually thinking about how you can layer on those additional states.
Totally. It's a great point. It's not even about the one state, it's about the multi-state approach. And one thing to consider there is we know clinicians who are licensed, let's say in multiple states. They start with a local marketing strategy in one state, but maybe they're from the other state that they're licensed in. So they have a lot of family and friends from, let's say, a previous part of their life there. The next place to go might not be a place in the original state that you just saturated in that local market. It might be going to the next market where you have your closest connection. So thinking about actually where do you want to saturate? It's not just, okay, I have this area, now I'll move over to this next area. It's where do I have my strongest promoters already living in a place, and then selecting based on that instead. One more reason that we think local marketing is super valuable, and Danielle alluded to this earlier, is because it makes your competition manageable. So again, going back to that Henry Meds example, they have hundreds of thousands or maybe even more dollars that they can spend towards paid advertising. And unless you have that budget, it's going to be really, really hard for you to compete on the same keywords, on the same concepts when you're bidding on paid ads. Versus when you're working hyper locally, you are competing against other folks who are of similar sizes of you in terms of their practice. And so then there you can really compete on the value that you're bringing to patients. And as you're bringing this really amazing comprehensive care to patients, you can be sure that your value is going to speak for itself. And that makes the competition way more reasonable as you're trying to acquire patients.
And even aside from the paid ads landscape, this has pretty significant implications for where you should focus digitally as well. And what I mean by that is if you are running paid ads or if you are trying to do SEO, it really makes sense to try to build your presence in a local area where you actually can more tangibly compete with a Henry Meds. So for example, things like Google My Business and making sure that your profile is really in great shape could be a great place to focus once you do want to acquire patients digitally as well.
Absolutely. And this is another video, but when someone Googles, let's say, weight loss providers near me or weight loss providers, Google will often surface the things that are actually close to that person geographically. So you having that like local regional presence can actually allow you to, for a lower cost or sometimes for zero cost, allow you to rank more highly in the search results than you otherwise would if someone in a faraway place was Googling the same thing. That's definitely another topic, and that's something that we can get into in the future. But for the time being, go and acquire patients that you know or that your friends know. Get into your community. It's a really amazing opportunity to give back, to engage, and just to use the advantages that you already have by being someone who is an active community member.
Good luck.